have the visuals of Prime Minister Modi there with the French president. In fact, those are the live visuals coming in from the G7. And this is going to be the reshaping of a new global order. Prime Minister Modi there has been warmly greeted by Emmanuel Macron. Leader after leader have been coming in, and G7 this year is going to be very special for India because this is where India's presence is going to be noted. Now, interestingly, this is going to be a huge one coming up. There's a meeting which is going to be on the sidelines of the G7 summit tomorrow. Is going to be between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. Trump and other world leaders are already there discussing Iran and the Ukraine war that has happened earlier today. There are, of course, a lot of conversations which are happening about what happens next in the peace deal with Iran. There's a tentative deal to end the Iran war. The leaders have so far been challenging, of course, the discussions which have happened about ending Russia's war in Ukraine as well, and also are going to be addressing the Middle East crisis. But all eyes are going to be on India. What is it that Prime Minister Modi is expected to say as he meets President Trump in over a year? Remember, the last time the two world leaders met was, I believe, in February last year, over a year back. And since then, what has happened? Well, of course, there has been cooperation on trade, on investment, but this is also after a stormy and rather acrimonious patch of diplomacy that we had with the sanctions which were imposed on India by President Trump and his administration. It also comes at a time when India-US trade deal hasn't been closed as of yet. We are still in talks. There has been forward movement, but there has been no deal which has been inked per se. This also comes at a time when Indian sailors were shot at as part at the Strait of Hormuz, which is why this is going to be very significant when the two leaders meet. So the world leaders have gathered in Evian in France for the G7 huddle. You can see the live visuals. Prime Minister Modi was just greeted right now by Emmanuel Macron. Two of the issues expected to dominate the discussions are Russia-Ukraine war, as I was telling you, evolving situation over the Middle East. India, of course, is not a G7 member, but in today's geopolitical landscape, India being made a part of such a conversation has become a global necessity. Let me go across to Zaka Jacob. He's joining us live from the venue side in France's Evian. You must explain to us, why is it so important that India be at the high table of the G7?
So this first session, Meghna, that the Prime Minister will be attending is called the Outreach Session. All the G7 member nations will be there, including France, which is the host nation. You saw moments ago Prime Minister in a handshake, a very warm handshake with Emmanuel Macron, the French president. Remember, this is a continuation of the Prime Minister's visit to France. He was here earlier this week as we see a ship teeing off from this side of the islands to the other side. We're in the place between France and Switzerland, so you can occasionally hear these sirens going off. These are ships that are traversing the Lake Geneva. But having said that, so, you know, it's important that India is part of this conversation because India is one of the many outreach partner countries this time around. There are many from the global south. Brazil is another one. I don't know if you saw those shots earlier about Prime Minister Modi and President Lula of Brazil speaking to each other, hugging each other. Brazil is the other country. There's Egypt, there is Qatar, and all of these countries will become the voice of the South. India, of course, is positioning itself as the voice of the South, and it's important that the voice of the South finds itself an audience and finds itself a presence in this global high table because, look, the G7 is essentially the industrialized Western nations. It's essentially an Anglican alliance between America and Canada on one side of the Atlantic and the Western European nations of Britain, Germany, France, and Italy on the other. If you need to have a more disparate and varied and diverse voices there in that room, you need the global South and you need countries like India because they bring a completely different perspective to some of the most pressing issues in the world right now. Not least, you mentioned, you know, the two wars that are going on. Hopefully one of them will conclude very soon in the next few days. The Iran war, we're expecting that peace signing agreement to happen in Geneva in Switzerland on the other side of this lake on Friday, and Vice President of the US, J.D. Vance, Vance is supposed to be here for that. And then, of course, there is the Russia-Ukraine war. Vladimir Zelensky is a guest invitee this time around. He had a brief conversation earlier today with President Trump. Again, that war seems to be stuck. Trump also spoke some time back about the Ukraine war, and he said, you know, now that the Iran war is done, our next attention, our next focus is going to be on Russia. Remember, he just spoke to Putin as well a couple of days ago on his birthday. It was a 1-hour-long conversation, and today he's met with Zelensky. So you can expect some sort of forward movement, some sort of action on the Russia-Ukraine front now that Iran seems to be stabilizing, or at least moving in the direction of a peace agreement. He also talked about the Iran peace agreement. There was this confusion about, you know, the money that America was supposed to give Iran, or was supposed to put in for reconstruction efforts in Iran. Trump has said that there's no question of putting any kind of money in Iran, and that you know, it is up to Iran to reconstruct itself wherever it finds the funding for the same. He was speaking to the Qatari leader. The Qataris have played a very important role as mediators, as sort of the go-between between Iran and the United States. Pakistan had tried to play that role. I'm not sure how much success the Pakistanis have had. And subsequently, just in the last month or so, in the last 4 to 6 weeks, it's the Qataris and the Omanis who've taken the lead in trying to negotiate this peace agreement between Iran and the United States. There is one standout dissenting voice, though, and that happens to be that of Israel. You've heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday speaking to the nation. He said that this is not something that Israel accepts. This is a deal essentially between Iran and America, and that Israel will defend itself if it came down to that. One of the stumbling blocks really has been the war in Lebanon. Every time the ceasefire seemed promising, or at least both parties were moving in the direction of a ceasefire, there would be an attack by Israel on Lebanon, and that would, you know, basically take both parties back to square one. I think Trump also expressed his frustration earlier today when he spoke about Netanyahu. He was asked about Netanyahu, and he said that it's time that Bibi gets his acts together in Lebanon. So there is a great degree of frustration. Clearly, both men are not on the same page. We're just hoping, for the sake of the world, for the sake of countries like India that are dependent on the Strait of Hormuz so much, that this peace finally happens and this peace lasts between America and Iran. And it will start this Friday when the signing ceremony happens in Geneva between U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Mohammad Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Iranian National Assembly.
Even as we speak, Zaka, we can see the group photograph of the G7 leaders about to take place. They are just taking their spots there for the group photograph. Of course, it's a customary one, but it is a very significant one after all. Because remember, everyone is talking not just about the deals, but Zaka, also about the kind of body language which are shared between the two leaders. And there seem to be a bit of ruffled feathers between the NATO leaders and that of President Trump as well. For example, that very frosty handshake between Emmanuel Macron and President Trump, followed by the discussions, the bilaterals that the two leaders had. Is war casting its shadow, a considerable shadow, over the G7 as well and the relationship there?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there was this pretty striking picture that happened in the earlier session, in the morning session. All the European leaders had gathered there. Chancellor Merz of Germany, Emmanuel Macron, the host, Keir Starmer, the Italian Prime Minister. They were all on one side of the room, one side of the table, essentially. And you had President Trump all alone standing in the other side of the room. And that kind of captured the picture in the room. Clearly, Trump is not the favorite in this room. As far as the Iran war is concerned, Europe, right from day one, and we saw a rare sign of unity between the four European nations, the Western European nations, Britain, Germany, France, and Italy, that they don't want to have any part as far as the Iran war is concerned. In fact, yesterday when he met Macron, and this again has been one of the points of contention between Europe on the one side and the United States, Trump never wanted any other party or any other country to provide any kind of military safe passage for commercial tankers. France had proposed that. I think Britain had backed that as well, but Trump said no. But yesterday, finally having realized that this is not a winning war, this is perhaps an unwinnable war, and that they have to move towards a peace agreement, Trump did concede that it would be a good idea if countries like France can send their military vessels in order to ensure that there is safe passage for commercial tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. So the divisions in NATO predate the Iran war. They've been fundamentally divided over the Ukraine war. Trump has been fundamentally saying from day one that if he were president, the war would have never started, and that Zelensky should concede, and that they should find a peace agreement, and that he essentially believes that Putin was justified, at least to some degree, in the war that he undertook in Ukraine. And that's a fundamental point of difference between him and the European leaders, and that, of course, drove a huge wedge in NATO. This time around, the second war, the Iran war, was started by America and Israel. Europe wanted to have nothing to do with it, and now I think, now that 3 months have passed in this war and Donald Trump has realized there is no way America can win this war, I think he's trying to find this peace deal and extricate himself politically, as well as extricate the United States out of this war, because there are very few good options left. In fact, all the options on the table are bad options. And if you look at it, all the clauses of this draft memorandum of agreement that has been circulating on social media, on almost all the clauses, the nuclear question, the Strait of Hormuz reopening, the war reparations, the war damages, the unfreezing of Iranian assets, on all of those, it's Iran that seems to have had the upper hand and not the United States. And that seems to indicate that Trump just wanted to get out of this war. He was desperate and looking for an off-ramp,
sorry to
and he's
interrupt
found
you. Even
one.
as we speak, we have a warm handshake on our screens right now. President Trump, Prime Minister Modi. After the photo op, all the leaders came inside the summit hall, and here you have a warm handshake with smiles all around. What are the indications for the meeting coming in tomorrow on the byline?
Well, don't be deceived by the warm handshake, because obviously it's in a room full of world leaders. Tomorrow's meeting is going to be bilateral. It's the first time that both of them will be meeting since February of 2025. And, you look at the issues in the last year or so, there have been some persistent and issues that are really sort of stumbling this relationship. And a lot of it is coming from President Trump's side. First, it was the trade and tariffs, then the additional tariffs that were slapped because of Russian oil import. Then finally, in January of this year, we finally managed to arrive at some kind of an understanding of 18% tariffs. And then suddenly, the Supreme Court of the United States struck down the legal rationale for the tariffs. So we're basically in a limbo. We don't have that interim trade agreement between India and America. I believe Jameson Greer, who's the chief trade representative for the United States, will be in India next week to continue those trade negotiations. But India is one of the large nations with whom America still does not have a trade deal, and that is a big cause of concern. More proximately, more recently, we've seen the deaths of the 3 Indian sailors. These were civilians, these were not combatants, these were not military or Navy personnel, these were civilians who were in merchant naval vessels. They were killed, and it's not just bad enough that they were killed by U.S. fire, U.S. Navy fire. The State Department put out a statement thereafter, very contrite, not expressing any regret or remorse. And I expect the Prime Minister to take this issue up with President Trump when he meets him tomorrow, because, this is just not on. You just cannot kill innocent bystanders to this war, people who have nothing to do with this war. Their only ill fortune was that they happened to be stuck in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's not like they were killed by Iranian fire or by Houthi fire or by Hamas fire. They were killed by American fire, which is a friendly nation, and friendly nations don't don't shoot at each other's citizens.
Absolutely. The next, of course, point of contention in the peace pact that we were discussing earlier, and Zaka, even as we speak, we are again playing the shots of President Trump and Prime Minister Modi sharing a warm handshake and smiles all around. But of course, we've seen similar body language there. Prime Minister Modi sitting right next to President Trump that we can see in the convention hall. He got up to greet Prime Minister Modi. Of course, he said, I love the Prime Minister in the past. Those are the kind of statements which have been coming in from President Trump. Zaka, of course, pointing out that behind the warm smiles, there is going to be shrewd diplomacy that we can expect tomorrow. But Zaka, I wanted to ask you about the Strait of Hormuz, because that seems to be one of the biggest points of contention when it comes to the war, because a short while back, President Trump seemed to indicate that it's going to be open for business from Friday. How much do we read into it, given the contradictory stance which is coming in?
Well, look, he said this yesterday when he met Macron as well. He said, according to President Trump, traffic is already flowing in, oil is already pumping down from the Strait of Hormuz. But that's not quite the case. I mean, as far as India is concerned, at least 13 Indian ships are still stuck in the Strait of Hormuz. So they are wanting and waiting eagerly for this agreement to be signed on Friday in Geneva. And the Iranian understanding is that the strait will be reopened once the agreement is signed in Geneva on Friday. Thereafter, yes, friendly nations ships like Indian ships will be allowed to pass, but there will be a new Iranian arrangement. I think the word that they've used in that 14-point memorandum of understanding is arrangement. Now, what is this Iranian arrangement? Abbas Araghchi was asked about this when he was in India last month. In fact, I asked him this question at that press conference, and he said, we will charge, along with Oman, a service fee for services rendered to commercial tankers. He didn't specify what amount, but estimates are it could be anywhere between $500,000 to $1 million per ship, per container, commercial container that passes through the Strait of Hormuz. He says this is the only way we can rebuild our country, and there is precedent to it as well. In the Suez Canal, for example, Egypt, which manages a large part of the Suez Canal, there is a service fee that is paid to the Egyptian authorities. So he's used that precedent to say that a similar thing will happen in the Strait of Hormuz. That, of course, is unacceptable to not just the United States. Even India would have a problem with some kind of a toll mechanism being introduced in the Strait of Hormuz, because if that becomes a precedent, then tomorrow China can start tolling the South China Sea, India can start tolling the Indian Ocean region, and that goes against the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, which clearly says that international waters have to be free, fair, and unimpeded. So I think this is something that will be worked out over a course of time. But at least the good news is, if and when that peace agreement is signed on Friday here in Geneva, then I think at least some of the ships that have been stuck there for a number of months, including these 13 Indian commercial tankers, may be allowed to pass.
Well, we are hoping that this is going to conclude. Well, G7 is where all the eyes are. Those are the live visuals coming in. A short while back, you had that warm Prime Minister Modi and President Trump's handshake. But how much should we read into this body language? Well, right here on Times Now, we are the only channel getting you the inside scoop of what's happening and what is to be expected at this dinner and diplomacy, all of it going hand in hand at the G7. Thank you so much, Zaka. We're going to be slipping into a short break. This continues to be the top focus right here on Times Now.